For over 25 years, the U.S. Navy contracted with a Singapore-based firm. It was known as the Glenn Defense Marine Asia, or also known as GDMA. The purpose of this was to provide ship services for the Navy, ships making port calls in the various ports in the Asia-Pacific, Southeast Asia region. Now, the man leading this business was commonly known as Leonard Glenn Francis, or also known by his nickname, Fat Leonard. That name might ring a bell for many of you guys. This caused over a decade-long controversy, as there are 8 officers that have been punished from this. On top of that, through the investigation, there's been around 60 plus admirals that have been investigated due to this, and 4 of the people that have been charged for issues with this have been admirals. And it wasn't until 2013 when Leonard Francis actually was lured over to San Diego, California, where he was arrested on charges in 2013, and then he actually pled guilty in 2015 to those charges. According to reports, it looks like Leonard Francis had made over $35 million off the U.S. military, some of the biggest fraud you could ever imagine out there. This all occurred because the Navy ships have to routinely make visits to port calls of other ports in various countries, which lack the organic support needed in order to provide basic services. A lot of these services could be force protection. That could be water, waste, whatever comes in that needs to happen as a ship gets to the pier, connectivity issues, all those things that, we as U.S. people or citizens do not have control over, and we have to network with these other types of businesses or foreigners or things like that that have different customs courtesies systems in place, and how do they mix with the U.S. military. The major flaw in the system was that the majority of Navy vessels at this time lacked technology like flow meters in order to measure how much liquid was actually going to be taken off the ship in regards to waste, etc. Should also be known that there is only so many miles out that you can discard certain things, and then once you come into port, you have to contract to have trash and things like that taken off. So for example, when I was on the ship, when we had old rotten food that was thrown away, it was put in plastic bags. Could not throw the plastic bags away, so I had to sit off the side of the ship, cut those open, and the food could go out, but we saved the plastic bags for when we actually pulled into port to allow us to be in compliance with all the stuff that goes on, so that way we're not polluting our ocean. Now, it should be noted, on top of these false amounts that were coming off the ship, as far as the flow meters that were out there, according to some of the reports that have, came across the legal side of this, is that there were times that Francis was actually having invoices that were being charged for amounts that the ship could not even hold. So he was charging beyond even what would be reasonable for that ship, and people were just writing off or signing off on it and saying, yeah, it looks good to me, because there was no actual objective evidence of how much water or waste was taken away. Now, it should be noted that this did not fall on deaf ears for a lot of people. There were people that tried to interject it at different times in order to make this apparent or make this known, but a lot of times there was so much corruption or collusion that was going on and embedded in the U.S. military on top of Francis's people, that essentially it was hard to even get this to be made known of. Now, one of those people is David Shouse. According to sources, in 2006, Dave Shouse, a naval officer, became suspicious of GDMA contracts, but Francis was alerted by an informant, Paul Simpkins. To the scrutiny, Simpkins, a decorated veteran of the U.S. Air Force employed as a civilian contracting officer by the Navy in Singapore, managed to quash any inquiry and had Shouse's position eliminated. And then it looks like Dave Shouse says, "What else could I have done to expose this racket?" Shouse asked, exposed as a whistleblower, he said, officers, quotations, "made my life hell." After discovering he had attempted to initiate an investigation of GDMA, also had intercepted letters that were supposed to go to NCS, which made claims that Leonard was overcharging. What's crazy is the officer community is small, and I believe he was a lieutenant commander at this time, and for him to raise these levels of suspicion, obviously understanding other people kind of knew what was going on, is very hush-hush, and, with this small group of people, I mean, that was putting his career in jeopardy to even try and make an announcement of this, because, as you're going to find out, there are a lot of officers benefiting from Fat Leonard's presence and his ability to get things done. Now, in order to win these contracts and to allow him to charge these increased fees, essentially. He would throw parties, private dinners, gifts, money, and women to help win the contracts. There'd be a false amount of wastewater moved, which was almost based on an honor system, and because of this, Francis was a security risk as he could dictate ways in which the U.S. military conducted operations and also knowing ship schedules. Obviously, operational security was a concern for this, and the fact that we were so reliant on one man, one contract to have this happen, and these officers were getting kickbacks from this, essentially made it a ability to get the job done. These officers were allowed to have fun. Everybody was a win-win-win situation here, and nobody wanted this lieutenant commander to ruin the party, essentially. And with operational security, you can look at the USS Cole back in 2000 over in Yemen, where this level of security was needed. This level of trust was needed. This level of having somebody able to do all these functions without having to do a contract here, there, and everywhere, and kind of a one-stop shop was desirable. However, it did lead us to a big security flaw that, you know, we look back now and we're like, how did we ever let this happen? Another factor besides this lieutenant commander that raised the flag as what Fat Leonard was doing was a military spouse over in Yokosuka, Japan. And this is covered in the Fat Leonard podcast very in depth. There's a guy named Tom Wright that actually does a 20-hour interview session with them and goes into the depths of what this case is. And this is because, like we said earlier, he was over in San Diego, California, being able to be allowed to be on his own without being in a prison cell because he was in a state of illness where he had kidney cancer. Essentially, from that podcast, it had known that there was a military spouse that knew that her husband was cheating, knew that some stuff was going on, kind of had some weird ideas that he was taking all these vacations and things like that, and essentially reported it up the chain of command. And along with these NCIS reports, along with all these people coming out and saying things about it, it finally made its way into the public sphere and people knew about it. And from that, it appears that he had actually had to hire his own security as well, which was going to be around the clock 24 hours. There is no discussion what type of security this was. Were these off-duty police officers? Was this a specific company? Who was this? Because it actually appears that in 2020, there was a 3-hour period, according to the judge, that he was not being monitored because there was a gentleman that wanted to take a lunch break. And now you're seeing in 2022, this is an issue now because he apparently had cut off his ankle bracelet. And according to sources, that once this bracelet is cut off, there are pretrial services out there which are alerted about this. However, the U.S. Marshals can't officially do anything until a judge signs some kind of warrant allowing them to go after this person, which I'm sitting here saying, like, if the point is to keep them in their house and they cut it, you know it's cut, and then you have to wait for a judge to do this, you're only giving that person a massive head start. Supervisor Deputy U.S. Marshal Omar Castillo told The Hill that his San Diego office received the call from U.S. Pretrial Services around 2:30 p.m., assembled a team, and were at the residence in no more than 30 minutes. That means more than 7 hours elapsed between Francis cutting off the monitor and authorities arriving at the house. 7 hours. Think of how far you can travel in 7 hours. You could fly to God knows where within 7 hours and be without, a trace anywhere. So if you guys have not seen First 48, First 24, whatever that show is called, we know that those first couple hours, day or two, are the most key and pivotal to find somebody. And obviously, Tom Wright, the guy that did that podcast, was very aware of the type of individual that we were dealing with here. And he says this: among the mysteries of the case is how the security around Francis remained so lax, even after officials appeared ruffled by his podcast, Wright said. And he says, quotations, "I found that a little strange. I thought that they were going to tighten up his security after," he said. Another head scratcher is why authorities weren't tipped off by security about the moving trucks. There are all kinds of questions in my mind. Did somebody pay off the guards? If not, where were they? And how the hell would this happen? It's just another black eye for the Department of Justice and the federal government in this case, Wright said. They've allowed him to escape in almost a Keystone Cops set of circumstances. And that's because according to reports, there were moving trucks or something going on, like U-Hauls, going to and from his residence that nobody reported. And I'm wondering, like, did the neighbors not see this? I'm sure they must have been aware or known that there was some kind of security always sitting outside this guy's house for several years, that they would have probably thought something of this. But again, it's been about 4 years, so maybe this is just something that they just write off and they became complacent as well. A few things I want to point out from this case is that Francis, if you listen to the podcast, if you know anything about this and you hear him speak about it, he's very much driven by ego. He very much feels like he was the scapegoat for this. He very much feels like this was not just him, and he feels that these admirals and these Navy officers and people should have just as much accountability and should not be focused on him. And I think that is probably maybe by public affairs standards trying to, polish a turd if they could. And you can obviously find out which officers were involved with this, as there have been many that have pled guilty to this case. And I don't want to say anyone has just been, let off without any repercussions at all. And many members of the official military here have gone to prison for many months, if not years, and there has been justice has been out there. And I wonder if you guys think there should be more justice that was brought with this. Do you think that Leonard was the one that saw the most brunt of this case and was kind of the one that they eyed on? My other situation I'm going to look at is why after 4 years, was he getting better? Where did his cancer progress to? Is his family, going to follow him from San Diego down to wherever he goes? But I wonder where this worldwide manhunt will take us as well, and I look forward to the updates to this case, and this just seems to keep getting deeper and deeper. As always, if you guys like the subjects I cover here, you can always make sure you hit me up on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, or down in the comments below. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.